Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 521. This program is sadly dedicated in honor, in memory, in loving memory of R Zvi ben Alexander Kogan, Hashem Yinkom Dome, who was torn away from us in a brutal fashion literally just today, when his body was discovered in the United Arab Emirates, where he was a shliach in Abu Dhabi with his wife, young man, shluchei mitzvah, and yet such tragedy. What can you say? In times like this, we don't have words. We don't have explanations. The shock is strong. We barely can cry. And yet at the same time, the story of the Jewish people, time and again, both collectively and individually, that even in the most difficult moments, found some way, deeper strength, not answers, not explanations, not less pain, but some way that something is even stronger than the pain, and that is our commitment not to be defeated, not to be weakened, but to use this tremendous energy, which is negative energy, and harness it into something positive. This is what we've been taught in Torah, Chassidus, by the Rebbe, by the Rabbeim. So the question is asked, how should we react to the horrific murder of R Zvi Kogan, Hashem Yinkom Dome? So firstly, obviously, our hearts and souls and prayers go out to his shattered family. And by extension, we're all family, especially Chabad Chassidim, but all Jews and all people. Yes, and we cry out, Ad Mosai. We've been promised time and again that tragedies will be over and we will have Mashiach here. And we always think this is it. And then yet again, another clap, another patch. So that's very clear that we acknowledge that. And I'm not just saying that just from my own emotional feelings. I look to the Rebbe. When Mrs. Lapine was brutally murdered in cold blood in Crown Heights, just a few weeks before the Rebbe had a stroke. Tov Shinun Beis. I remember the Rebbe's talk, his sikha that he spoke, the broken heart, the anguish, words that you'd never heard from the Rebbe before or after. Quoting a pasuk in Kehelis that says, don't speak about Hashem because Hashem is in heaven and you're on earth. And the Rebbe said, even though it says that you should minimize your words and not speak, the Rebbe spoke anyway. So we gather direction and strength from that. Because at the end of the day, the story is not over. So yes, right now, grieving, mourning, the shock, disbelief. We thought the story with the Holzbergs in Mumbai, that would be like the exception. Well, here we have this, and he's related to the Holzbergs. But together with the dima, the crying, we have to remember tears are also drops, raindrops. Hazerim bedima bedinu yukseru. They have the tremendous power to get us out of our complacency and our reverie and our indifference and apathy. A wake-up call, it's called. But a wake-up call, hopefully, not one that just lasts as long as the pain lasts, but one that is sustainable. And our battle against every type of darkness is always with greater light. We will not be identified and defined by our enemies, nor by their behavior. We're defined by our neshamas, and when there's more dark, there needs to be more light. The Rebbe's approach to the Yad Chamisha when there was a tragedy, terrorists attacking Beit Sefer L'Melacha that was built by Chabad back in Tovshin Tazayin, that from destruction has to always come greater building. So that is a given. But it's not just a statement, it's actually the very way we tap into, as the Rebbe writes so often to people, we don't ask why these things happen. We'll never know. We ask, what are we going to do about it? We don't ask for answers, we ask for strength. And that's what we need to gather here, together. Talk about Chassidei Chabad, Shluchei Chabad, an unprecedented revolution in Avos Yisrael, unity, in kindness, in doubling and tripling and quadrupling all our activities. So that's our reaction. It's a combination, yeah. B'chiyah b'tkiyah da, and chedvasa b'tkiyah da. We cry here and we celebrate here. And sometimes simultaneously. And we appreciate our blessings. And we appreciate what he was Meiser Nefesh for. Being a Jew, Kiddush Hashem. So therefore we need to fill that void by increasing and doing everything possible to spread more Torah, more Chassidus, more Torah, Vedic Mills, Chasadim, in all possible ways. And to be a living example of what happens when tragedy strikes, here's what we do. We become greater people, more beautiful people. And in stark contrast to the enemies and the haters who perpetrated this heinous crime. It goes without saying, but it should be said, that obviously everything has to be done to also protect and defend ourselves. This isn't just turning the other cheek and doing positive things. Everything possible to apprehend the criminals and to preempt anything similar. And we all know we're all rooted. And it comes down to, again, strength. We have eros from the Rebbe, directives. The only way you have a true peace for all sides is out of strength, not out of soft peddling or diplomacy and negotiations. When you have enemies that have declared war on you, and for no reason, here, this is not an attack on anyone living in Israel. This was in the UAE, in the Emirates, a Jew, a rabbi. So you have sworn enemies. There's only one way to deal with them. Total, absolute destruction of the enemy, or total unconditional surrender. So this is an overall response to how we react. This is the Jewish way of reacting, and we see it throughout history. We'll talk about it more during this program. This week's Parshas talk about all this. Literally. Avram Avinu having a son, Yishmael, progenitor, at least in general terms, of the Arab Muslim world. Yitzchak, progenitor of the Jewish people. Then Eisav and Yaakov, ancestor Eisav, of Remi, as it says at the end of Parsha Vayishlach Rashi, of the Western Roman Christian world, and Yaakov, son of Yitzchak, continuing ancestor of the Jewish people. And the battles that they fought. And when you look at Midrashim and the Zohar and so on, you find all the prophecies and descriptions of what would happen over time, the battles that would be waged, and especially at the end of times. Again, we'll talk about that as we continue. So we are standing on the foundations and pillars of history, both some of the negative things that have happened, but above all the positive things, because we prevailed in each case. With all the pain of Golus Mitzrayim, we finally got out of Mitzrayim. and we survived and thrived, whereas the Egyptians are no longer here. Definitely not as an empire. And the same thing with the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Byzantines and the Ottoman Empire, the Spanish Empire, and of course, all the way down to the Middle Ages and then farther into the Nazis and the Germans. So when you look at the big picture, we know we'll prevail, but that doesn't take away from the even short-term pain. As they were afflicted and oppressed, the Jewish people, in direct proportion to that, they thrived, they blossomed, they flourished. And we're part of that narrative. We are part of it. So when it happens in our case, in our time, we take the same formula. We take the same approach. But now let's break it down. We already received many, many questions today. I'm sure more will come in. Some are easy to anticipate. So let's address it from a Torah applied, Chassidus applied approach that gives us strength. Remember, the Torah and the Primus Torah, Chassidus particularly, are our allies. They are our resource center, you can say, where we get the strength, we get direction, guidance, hope, trust of how to forge ahead. So question, what are its deeper implications of this horrific murder? Well, there are many ways to look at that, and we'll talk about some of them as we go along. The first that jumps out at you is that this is a war not just, as they like to put it, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel. This was not Israel. And this is not particularly an attack on anyone that represents Israel, government, military, a rabbi. Of all places, in a Muslim Arab country. Attacked by another Arab country, Iran. So you see from this that it's a bigger story here going on than just what some like to paint as being something isolated to Gaza or to certain areas. Because this could have happened anywhere. So I think it just reveals, not that it's anything new, but anyone that knows this picture understands this already, but it just reveals for maybe some who didn't fully appreciate that we're talking about something global and even cosmic in a certain way. And I don't say that in a positive sense, that there's something going on of a type of hostility and attack on the Jewish people and everything they represent. And we know what the Jewish people represent, God. So ultimately, it's like the last gasps, as the Rebbe would put it, of the tzaddik keneged, of the enemy, before it's completely vanquished as we march into the Geula. Because remember, the promises that we are the last generation of Golos and the first generation of Geula did not go away. We can't go backwards. The clock only goes forward. We can only get closer to the Geula. So when you see things like this, like the Rebbe said, Purim at the end of the Farbrengen, Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin, that classic Farbrengen. And he says, well, how can we say Geula is right here when we see all kinds of things in the world that we've never seen before? And the Rebbe meant negative things, he said clearly. So he said, Yizbaro v'yislab nadvarim. We see clarity. So if we needed clarity, here is more clarity. I'm not suggesting this is why it happened. I'm saying, what are implications? You need clarity, here's clarity, what we're dealing with. So any decent thinking person says, what's going on here exactly? Was he killed? Why? Because colonialism in Gaza? That myth and false narrative. And deeper implications go back to some of the sikhs that the Rebbe spoke about over 30 years ago, which we'll talk about shortly. Is this a sign of a widening war against Jews? We have to always think positively, or the attacks and the protests and anti-Semitic propaganda on the campus is a sign of a widening attack. It's a sign of exposing what some people feel. I'd like to believe, and I think we all believe, that these are a minority. They're just very loud and very dangerous. So in that sense, yes, we definitely have to be on alert. But to go with an attitude, it's a widening attack, and let us all now cower in fear and shrink and retreat, no. But to be more Jewish than ever and demand from the world to rise and say, what do you stand for? The Jews are being attacked means it's an attack on all decent people. So I think it's more of a revealing of people's feelings as opposed to keeping it undercover. But at the same time, we have to be vigilant and wise, both as security-wise and other ways. But not in a way of fear and not in a way of retreat. We come out stronger than ever, both in defending ourselves and fighting for what we stand for. And it's good to hear Israel declaring that, and the UAE, and hopefully other countries will join that voice, while we also strengthen our commitments to spreading light and spreading tzedek and yesher. Should we be afraid? We should be prudent. We should be on alert, but not afraid. Utz Eisav v'sufer, davra dobra v'layokom, ki imanu keil. We have imanu keil with us. And Hashem yilochem lechem. And all the different expressions. We have to do our part, b'derech hateva. Strong military, strong protection, security. But not fear. We don't fear. We only fear God. Revere God. How are we to understand Iran's extreme hostility and hatred toward Israel and Jews? Well, beyond the obvious, it really goes back. Eisav Seina Yaakov. How do you explain Esav's hatred for Yaakov that we begin reading in this week's parsha? And for that matter, Yishmael and Yitzchak. That expression is not used there, but still. So if you think of it in historical terms, it's the context of Avram's legacy. The legacy of what he brought to people, to his own family, to his children, Hashem. And Yitzchak had the balanced harmony, as did Yaakov. And Yishmael did not, and Eisav did not. They had their difficulties, and that's why they refused to receive the Torah and Matan Torah when Hashem offered it to them. But in time, they would slowly receive it with the birth of Christianity and later Islam, to some extent. You know, religions and religious passion is very powerful, but it has to be balanced. It can't be extreme. Chesed has to be balanced with Gvura. If not, it becomes Chesed Lo Mazeh. Chassidus explains, Yishmael. Gvura needs to be balanced with Chesed. Yaakov, Tiferes, balances the two. Eisav was Gvura, Ish Tzayid, Ish Melchami Yedid Tzayid, a warrior. So the harnessing these forces is the challenge. When they explode, they turn into real wars. As I pointed out, all the midrashim that talk about the confrontations between the Bnei Yishmael and Bnei Eisav and Bnei Yisrael. So, to understand their hostility, it comes down to something a lot deeper. It's not just land, power, jealousy, shame, which is all part of it. But it comes down, there's a fundamental difficulty. I mean, I'm quoting now the psukim about Eisav and Yaakov, but it can be applied to all the Gentiles of all the nations of the world that opposed the Jewish people, that it's a war between God and the material world in a way. Like two nations are within you, Rivkah was told. We read in this week's Parsha. Lum Lum Yamotz. 2 nations within you, 2 archetypes. One driven by materialism, another by spirituality. One is Ishtam Yeshev Aholim, one is Ish Sayid, Ish Machame Yedit Sayid. And similarly with Yishmael, in a different form. That's where it's rooted. Ultimately, there will be peace. Ultimately, Mashiach will come. V'hoisel Hashem Amlucha, as Rashi brings in Parashat Vayishlach, and the same thing with Yishmael. Even in his lifetime, Yishmael did tshuva, as we just read at the end of last week's Parsha, yesterday's Parsha. Because at the end of the day, they are children of Avram, and Yishmael is Yishmakel. God will listen. So that's the end story. But the tensions, which essentially in Avodas Hashem, in the language of Chassidus, is the battle between the Nefesh Halakis and Nefesh Habamis, takes on the form of Yaakov and Eisav, or the form of Yitzchak and Yishmael. And as I'm quoted, and I'll quote again, the Pesach Mamorim of Toshin Tes of the Frierdiker Rebbe, based on the Pesach Mamorim of the Rebbe Rashab and Tofrei Samach Tes, talk about the last birur being the end of time will be the birur of Yishmael and the birur of Eisav. Netzach and Hoid. But it didn't begin today. This is the end process. The beginning goes back all these thousands of years. That's what lies at the heart and soul of Iran's hostility. And you could say the general Arab-Muslim hostility. But things have changed. The UAE actually signed a peace accords with Israel without having to give any land for it. Cultural, economic. Maybe that's part of the plan to disrupt that as well. So when you really think deeper, this is a fundamental, a cosmic, historical, philosophical, spiritual battle that takes on many shapes and forms. And as the Jewish people, we have to represent the balance of relieving the tension between matter and spirit, not through war, and not through killing, and not through violence, but through integration. Ultimately, like the Baal Shem Tov says, Kisida Chamer Sanacha, maybe your enemy. You see the Chamer, the Chomer Haguf, physicality is your enemy. So you would think you ignore it, or you destroy it. Oh, Ozev Tazev Yimei. You have to help it, you have to harness it. Turn it into a force of good. We have to convince, inspire the animal soul. And the same thing when you talk about on a cosmic level, on a macrocosmic level, the nations of the world, and transform them. We shall transform them. They will be transformed. And this process has begun. We see it. A country like the United States and so many other Western countries that became benevolent, Malchus shal chesed, in the words of the Rebbe, chesed, like Chsidu Mese'elam. Not that everyone's perfect, not every individual, but overall a trend going in that direction that's only growing. And yet we still have the setbacks and we still have to deal with a Muslim Arab world. And they too will be tamed. But we have to keep forging ahead and having the big picture in mind while we also deal with the short-term picture, which is the defense, the protection, and and peace only through strength, and so on. But then we see that hostility and hatred. You have to understand that's where it's coming from. Material world hates spirituality. The selfish world hates godliness. Not just dislike, hates. So now someone asks, if we are already defeated the Persians on Purim, why do we still need to contend with Iran? Because like the Gemara says, Akata Avd Achashverosh, we're still servants of Achashverosh even after the miracle of Purim. What that means today, we're not technically Achashverosh, but Achashverosh still has power and we still have to contend. Was it not a complete victory on Purim? So that's the answer. The Geula Amitis Vashlema did not come. Purim was a Geula, and all Geulas are connected, but it's not the ultimate. Somebody else writes, in that spirit, now that Iran is sending a terrorist to kidnap and murder Chabad rabbis in Dubai, is it clear the current Middle East conflict has nothing to do with the physical land of Israel, but is part of a larger spiritual war between good and evil? Clearly, the evil side is doing what it can to stop the spread of Torah mitzvahs, which makes it more important for us to increase in Torah mitzvahs to defeat them. May Hashem console the family of Rabbi Kogan and protect all of us all over the world so that these tragedies never happen again. Amen v'amen. So this reflects some of what I've been saying. Next question. Can we interpret the Yalkut Shemoni as referring to today's events? So what Yalkut Shemoni? We're talking about the famous Yalkut Shemoni that the Rebbe quoted in 1991 during the Persian Gulf War. And there it was Saddam Hussein of Iraq attacking Kuwait and the whole world being overwhelmed by that. And the Rebbe quoted the Yalkut Shemoni. Let's read the Yalkut Shemoni quickly, as a quick translation of it. So the Yalkut Shemoni says like this. I'll read it a loose translation in English. In the year that King Mashiach will be revealed, I should say, the kings of all the nations of the world will challenge one another. And then he continues, the king of Persia, of Paras, will challenge an Arab king. And the Arab king will go to Aram. Some places it says to Edom, to consult with them. Then it says, and then this king of Persia, or Paras, go back and destroy the world. Meaning he will attack the entire world. And all the nations of the world will panic, be stricken with consternation, will be in anguish. V'nefel al pneim, they'll fall on their faces, and they'll feel in deep pain. And the same thing will happen with the Jews. Yisrael misrashim mizbam, the Jews will also be overwhelmed. And they will say, Lehecha Navi, where shall we go? From where shall we come and where shall we go? They'll be confused. He says it 3 times. Lehecha Navi v'nelach, Lehecha Navi v'nelach, Lehecha Navi v'nelach. And that's when Hashem will tell them. God will tell the Jews, my children, Bonai, do not be afraid, have no fear. Everything that I have done for you, for your sake. Why are you afraid? Don't be afraid. Higi azman gulaschem. The time of your redemption has come. And this final redemption will not be like the first redemption, which still had a golus that came afterwards. This one will be permanent. There will be no longer pain and subjugation to any of the nations. That's the Yalkut Shemoni. And he continues to talk about Mashiach going on the Gag Beis Medrash, Beis HaKnesses, and announcing the Giaz Mangul Aschem. This is what the Rebbe quoted then, with Melech Poras, obviously the king of Iraq, Saddam Hussein attacking an Arab country, Kuwait. Can this be applied today? So none of us are a Rebbe. I can't say what the Rebbe would say. But when we say Persia, even at the time I remember, Persia can be Iraq, it could also be Iran. Iran is probably closer to Persia even than Iraq, even though they really they border on each other. But you can definitely speak about Iran in this way, and in many ways the threats of Iran are much bigger than the threats of Iraq back then. And now they attack not just Israel, but they attack also an Arab country. by killing one of its citizens. I don't know if he's an actual citizen, but one of its residents. But the message for sure can be applied. Do not be afraid. Now, why we need to go through this in order to come to the Geula, that's the mysteries that we'll never understand. But clearly he says that. Don't be afraid, even though this has happened, and there's plenty of reason to be confused as they create such havoc, which is exactly what Iran is doing. No, he says, my children, I've done it all for you. Which means there's some need for the final bitter of Yishmael. Not, God forbid, a need for tragedies like the one we're talking about, or other tragedies, but a need for them to go through their final growing pains, if you wish, birth pangs, before they become transformed, and before the Geula comes. So it definitely applies to today, and it's actually very applicable in so many different ways. But we learn from this that now we have to deal with them accordingly, which means with full strength, defanging the enemy, all the way the head of the snake, Resha Tanin, in this case not Pare, but what's going on in Iran, and by extension their proxies. And you see immediately what happened today, rockets being shot. Yes, the pretense is the attack in Beirut, but bottom line is you have threats coming from the north of Israel and the south of Israel. And you have to eliminate that entirely, but from the head. Whatever it takes. While also knowing that we're marching toward the Geula. And it's all part of that process. That's the real story. So the Yalkut Shemoni serves a tremendous lesson to us. And as I've spoken in a few programs recently, and as I've done over the years, there are many medrashim that support this. The Zohar Seif Parsha Va'era, the Zohar Seif Parsha Balak, and more places that talk about the battles at the end of time and the final bitter of Yishmael and Eisav, which again is in this week's Parshas. And being that when we read this week's Parshas, you actually see this hinted to, which I'll talk about a little more later, as when we get to the Parsha. But I want to talk about a few more things in this context. Would it be correct to say that the current Iranian regime established in 1979 is like an alter ego, Zel Umazeh, of Chabad elef, havdolos? And I emphasize elef, havdolos. So in 1979, the Shah of Iran, which was more pro-Western and turning the country, modernizing it. So there was the uprising against that. And the religious Sunni, Shiites of the Iranian, Khomeini and his cohorts, they took over control. Now it's 45 years since then. Many Jews left then, many Jews came to the United States. Many of us took in those Persian Jews that needed somewhere temporarily till they settled in. So someone interestingly creates this type of zeluma as a parallel. And I'll just read short snippets of what someone wrote. Khomeini, with a K, same generation of the Rebbe, again, elef, havdolos, identified himself like a spiritual leader. He took Shia Islam and wanted to bring his community back to religious observance instead of it being modernized. Unfortunately, his mission, while on the surface was seemingly a positive one, to bring them all back to faith in God, it spread darkness and death as opposed to positivity, light, and unity. And that's the Umazeh, they saying, of Chabad, which is doing that, but the exact other extreme. Khomeini created a perspective that revolutionary Islam can guide someone in every area of their life. He created Hezbollah, like his emissaries, with offices all throughout the world. Those operatives are to spread revolutionary Islam, conduct clandestine murder missions, and chaos. The direct opposite of what the same force would be in the positive side. He's like a cult-like figure, Khomeini, for his community. He has martyr-type emissaries all throughout the world, but does not believe in world unity, but an Islamic takeover of the world. With all the destruction and stress we have amongst the people of Israel in the last 30 months, why are we still reading about strife, division, and hate amongst our people in Israel? Why haven't we learned and realized that our strength comes from unity? When we are most divided, our enemies penetrate us. Can you please take my questions to heart and respond to them? So, interesting parallel. I would not make such a parallel. It's also very almost distasteful to make this parallel. But I see what you're saying. I mean, the Rebbe did say to a radio commentator in Tov Mem why he established Shivas Hashem. And he said, because he sees this is 1980, 1 year after 1979, he says, I see from my confidential sources, the Rebbe said, there's a change, a shift taking place in the Arab Muslim world. That once upon it was controlled by sheiks who could be bought off with money, with a car, with a house. Now it's being run by religious fanatics. And the younger people are starting to take over. And you can't buy them off. They have these religious, zealous passions. By the Jewish people, the Rebbe said, I see a trend the other way around. Once they were the pioneers, the chalutzim, who built the country. And today the young are become more disenfranchised and are not so passionate. So I thought to myself, this is what the Rebbe is saying. What can I do to stimulate and get the young passionate again? We can establish at Sivas Hashem, an army of Hashem, of young soldiers who will commit to Torah and mitzvahs. And the Rebbe mentioned some names, I don't remember. He said a Yaakov in London, Avram in America, another person in Tel Aviv. And they all together say Shmei Yisrael, the other Psukim Amar Chazal, and embrace Yiddishkeit. That can create a new revolution of the young, countering the revolution going on in the other side of the world. The other side of the spectrum, I should say. So there is something to be said about Azelu Mazeh in that sense. So that's interesting. Again, sorry that it had to come with such tragedy, but it's something to note. So our counter response to all of it, yes, is to unite all over the world, which is exactly where Shluchei Chabad are, everywhere, unite in an unprecedented way, in bringing more light and more love and more kindness, tzedek v'yesher, and virtue to the world. That's exactly what happens when you see the other side behaving the way they behave. So, in that context, that would work. So a few more questions in this regard, which clearly is becoming a very dominant, important theme, at least for this week's program. So someone asked, is evil a creation or only the absence of good? Very fitting to what's going on. Well, so this is I don't want to overly elaborate, I'll just be brief. Obviously, ein ra yered milmayla. Evil does not come from above because God is kulei tov, total good. So then how is there evil? So Chassidus explains briefly that ultimately it comes from the concealment of the divine, which itself is also hein v'resav, it's God's power. But concealment can create when it's misunderstood and abused, like the father hiding from the child and the child doesn't realize, or the teacher being quiet in order to prepare himself to teach the student something new and deep and unprecedented. So the silence can be misunderstood as being abandonment. And abandonment can lead to, okay, I'm on my own. Where's God? And that can ultimately, nishtalshal, lead to First, selfish behavior, and ultimately behavior that can hurt other people, what we would call evil behavior. So it originates as the absence of good, meaning there's no creation of evil, but then it takes on a shape. And Chassidus says that Raz Heder doesn't have any real substance, but it can create real substance when we give it credence, we give it substance. And when we ignore it, and when we battle it and transform it back to good, then we free it, we free ourselves, and we reveal its true nature, that it really has no substance. So in other words, we give it substance, and that's why it's real in that sense. This is the brief answer. So that, of course, explains how our attitude has to be. We have to do whatever we can to eradicate it. Shvirosan zui takanosan. We have to destroy, annihilate, break it. And that's the tikkun. Because that's what the whole purpose was, that it should not that it should exist, but it should not exist. And to break it if we see it there, if it has any hold. And to bring out the best within us. And that's our approach when we deal with it. So you have to do the shvirasan, but most importantly, you have to do the good that comes out of it all. Why do we need evil, especially extreme evil? If it says in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ba B'Truni and Eisav, so in other words, God will not come with any complaint to his people. He's not going to ask us to do something we can't do. How do we explain having to exist in a world with rising crime and terrorism? So first let's explain, the need for evil is not for evil. The need is for a challenge. The need is for the silence, for the tzimtzum that conceals, that allows an independent consciousness to arise, or else we don't have a tachtenim to make a dira b'tachtenim. And that's the whole kavon, Nesav HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Atzmus, a desire to have a dira b'tachtenim. Tachtenim means there has to be, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 36 in Tanya, concealment. So it's not that we need evil, we need that option. We need that concealment. And the goal is to not be fooled by the concealment and see through it and beyond it and discover the godliness in the Haster Aster Pone Bayemahu. To find the Gili Alakus, the deeper Gili of the Helama Atzmi, and the deeper expression of divine even in the darkness. Then once there's that possibility, it can end up in extreme evil because human beings have free will and they can do things, as I said, the concealment, which is a vacuum in the beginning, just a concealment, can end up becoming a lot worse. But the question here is, how do we explain having to exist in a world with rising crime? That we are challenged today to face rising crime and terrorism. Well, as the Rebbe said, Purim Mem Zayin, it's Yizbaru v'Yislabna Advarim. Number one is, it's revealing itself so that we can finish the job because we see it, it's not hidden. But like we speak about Ikvus of the Mashiach, there's certain things that will happen in the end of days, the last gasps of the Tzaddik Keneged of the other side, that sometimes come, like when you get to the bottom of the pot, most of the grime begins to emerge. So that's why it can appear like a rising crime and terrorism, as you put it. But in truth, it's just the last gasps. Do we need evil because without evil we wouldn't be able to comprehend what good is? And if so, why do we need such extreme evil? Wouldn't a small, minuscule amount of evil be enough? So it's not just comprehending what good is. Like I said, it's in order as a result of having free will. It's true that that through evil you can also appreciate what is good. And it's true he also always asks for the minuscule amount. But, because of free will and because people's mistakes, it can get worse. Just like an infection is there for you to fight it, but if you ignore it, it festers and it can grow into something far worse, God forbid. And finally, one more question. Since we're coming from Chav Cheshvan as well, the Rebbe Rashab's birthday, so someone asks, in honor of Chav Cheshvan, could we ask Rabbi Jacobson to explain how the Rebbe Rashab explains why saying Amen yehei shmei rabba with all our might, the Gemara says in Shabbos Daf Kuf Yutes. I believe it's Shabbos Daf Kuf Yutes, is it? Or is it Barachas? We'll look it up. But upon the Gemara says that a person who says Amen yehei shmei rabba b'chol keichei, Shabbos Kuf Yates Amud Beis, is Kedin like Gzar Dinei. It eliminates, it tears up the decrees, the negative decrees, which is so fitting to events like happened today. So the Rebbe Rashab in Ayin Beis explains that. And I can tell you where that is. That's on page, in volume 3, page 1416 and 1417. So briefly, the Gemara brings that ayah from a pasuk in Sheftim in Shiras Deveda, that eliminating any decrees against the Yidden is when they thank Hashem, when they bless Hashem, Baruch Hu Hashem. And that's where we learn this Maimar Chazal. That Rebbe Rashab explains, because when you bless Hashem, you're going all the way back to the root and source in Pnimius, in Atik. That's higher, less shmei b'hatika, where there's no negative sides altogether. So it's mamtik the gvuras, it sweetens the gvuras and transforms the negative into positive, as he explains at length there. So when you're subject in the structure of, say, the shtalshlus of the cosmic order, there's a yamin, there's smile. There are times where there's a flow of beautiful blessings, and sometimes there's challenges. But when you go all the way, when you bless Hashem, you say, Omi Yesherah Kol Keiche, as he explains at length, which means with all the power, and Rashi says, B'chol Kavanose, with all the intent, and he explains that that's by contemplating and Hamayich Be'echad, how everything in existence is really all part of God's unity. So you're reaching a place, so there's no such thing as any room, like higher than the Tzimtzum, there's no room for anything that defies godliness. It's all part of God's unity. It's only when there's a concealment where you have that possibility. So that's why creating Gzar Dinei, because you're going to a place where there is no room for another alternative except godliness, which is synonymous with goodness. And of course, we should merit to experience that in the fullest sense of the word. So that's why, again, when we add in good things, when we add in blessing Hashem, in our prayers, in our mitzvahs, in the spreading chassidus and Torah, that reaches those highest levels and eliminates anything negative. So this is a good segue to go into Parsha Teldas, this week's Parsha. And always living with the time, the Parsha Mamash talks about these battles that we're talking about today, going back from biblical times. Yishmael and Yitzchak, Yishmael doing tshuva like we learned in last week's Parsha, after he was sent away at the insistence of Sarah. And then this week's Parsha, the beginning of the next generation, Eisav and Yaakov. So, what can we learn from what do we learn from Parshas Teldas? We learn exactly that these battles are not new. Doesn't make it less painful, but they're not new, they go back. And that also teaches us what's lying at the heart of it. It's a battle between Tachtenim and Elikos, between godliness and this world and existence. With the nations of the world, Avram Avinu representing the godliness that he introduced to a pagan world, and the nations of the world representing the opposite. Yishmael, Chesed of Lumazeh, Eisav, Gvura of Lumazeh, of the negative. And we see it right away indicated in the Baal HaTurim. What can we learn from the Baal HaTurim explaining the connection between the end of last week's portion and the beginning of this week's? When you read it, it's like prescient, it couldn't be more relevant. I'll read it in English as a quick translation. So it says, Al Pnei Ochav Yipel, talking about Yishmael. On the face of all his brethren he fell, talking about Yishmael. And this is followed immediately, that's the last pasuk in Chayesar, followed immediately by Ela Teldes Yitzchak. And these are the children of Isaac. Says the Baal HaTurim. What does it come to teach us, that flow? That consecutive flow? To teach us that the son of David, who stems from the children of Yitzchak, Ben David, Mashiach, will sprout when Yishmael will fall at the end of days. Then will sprout the son of David, Ben David, who stems from the children of Yitzchak. Baal HaTurim, end of Parsha Chayesara. Mamash the last Baal HaTurim in last week's chapter. So you see here the flow from Yishmael, Yitzchak, now Elatel this Yitzchak. So that's Mamash the Gula. The Yalkut Shemoni, you could say, is very similar idea. God did this all b'shvilchem. He gives man Gulaschem. So the wars that are being fought by Melech Paras, the Melech Arvi, is all b'shvilchem. It's all in order to bring the Geula. That from the Bnei Yishmael we come to, when they fall, you come to the birth and the sprouting of Bnei Yitzchak, Ben David, Mashiach. As he explains also in the Zohar that I mentioned, Zohar Pasha Ve'era, also fascinating Zohar in this context. What's the central theme of this Torah portion? Well, the central theme is, of course, the story of Teldus Yitzchak, Yaakov and Eisav, the two twins, the two alter egos, L'um L'um Yemes, two nations at war from the womb. And that ultimately, it's only through Yaakov that Eisav can ultimately fulfill his purpose as well, both the firstborn status as well as the brachas that Yitzchak gave. Which explains why did Rivkah not try to intervene after hearing that she was carrying the wicked Eisav in her womb. She felt a very difficult pregnancy, so she asked, and Hashem answered, because you carry two nations. And as Rashi says, one of them, when they would pass by a Beis HaKnesses, a holy place, Yaakov would want to come out. When they would pass a Beis Avodah Zarah, Eisav, and it says there clearly the word Rasha. So she knew that he was a Rasha. They would be a Rasha, evil. So why didn't she do anything about it? Because she understood these are two nations. This is the way God created the world. There's a nefesh elikis and nefesh abamis, a divine soul and animal soul. Zelu mazeh os elikim. Two sides. And they will have to battle. Of course she was pained by it. But it's the two children she's carrying, both children from her and Yitzchak. The goal ultimately is not the destruction of one. It's the harnessing, the transformation. Like Rashi says in Pasha V'yishlach, I mentioned before, where they ultimately will live side by side, and Esau will be transformed. But till then, the children are young, the sheep are tender, can't yet live side by side. Matter and spirit can't so easily coexist. The Rebbe explains this also in the famous Vayeshev Tavshinun Beisiche, where he talks about why the Alter Rebbe opposed France, which was represented Eisav, and wanted Alexander of Russia to win because it would be easier for the Yidden, Beruchnis, even though Begashmis would be more difficult because Napoleon represented godlessness. But now, says the Rebbe, 7 generations later, we're ready to be Mevared Eisav. We're ready to go to V'hisal Hashem Amlucha, to go into the Western world, including France, including the Western world, and transform it, as he elaborates in that Sikh. And the final question, at least for this week in this context, is how was Eisav able to legally sell his birthright, and how could his blessings be stolen? Manavshach, that's his birthright. It's not what he can't just buy it. And if it's blessings, what difference does it make whether Yaakov dressed up like Eisav? It's not the gay of the covenant. The blessings belong to Eisav. So clearly, it's Yaakov. It's not like anybody could have just come and said, you know what, Eisav, I'm buying your birthright from a different family, because Yaakov and Eisav were born as twins. And Chassidus, the Rashi explains, even though Eisav came out first, but Yaakov could have come out first. So it's not so black and white. So even though technically Eisav came out first, but the kavanah was actually Yaakov. And same thing with the blessings. This was not taking away the blessings or the birthright from Eisav, it was harnessing them. Eisav was not able to understand how to use them. It's like the body without a neshama of Yaakov cannot give it direction. It doesn't have direction. So even though the yesh hanivra of the body has in a certain way reached rooted in atzmos, as Chassidus explains, but to be magali, you need the neshama, you need oir, you need teira oir. Ishtam yeshev aholim, you need Yaakov to reveal it. So it wasn't taking away, and it was also not going to someone strange person, it was going to Yaakov. They were really two parts of one big picture, which will be revealed la'asad love. That's the brief answer. So this also teaches us today, our goal is destroy obviously anyone that's a threat by all means. Koch nefesh, self-defense. But the goal is ultimately the transformation of the world. Oz epech elam sofa brura. Okay. There are many more questions, but time is limited. I'll just address one, which is really a different topic altogether. I wanted to focus primarily on the events, the sad events, but I'll mention one since it's a Thanksgiving question. I'm sure there are other people who have this question. So it's really going a different track altogether. There's many more questions which I simply don't have the time to address. Should I attend a family Thanksgiving non-kosher dinner? My husband's parents always invite us for a Thanksgiving dinner, and I hate going because they serve turkey, which is very clearly not kosher, as it's impossible to have a tradition passed on that is kosher because turkeys are only native to North America, and European Jews would never have heard of a turkey until 200 years ago. The Ramah clearly paskins in Yeredeya, 82.3, says Pei Beis Gimel, that we can only eat birds that have a tradition passed down that they are kosher. Okay. In addition, the Torah clearly says birds of prey are forbidden, and we know that turkeys are related to a type of bird of prey called a vulture. In some places, turkeys are even called turkey vultures. I can't understand why so many fools violate the Torah and eat it. They might as well be serving pork and bacon at Thanksgiving dinners because it's the same tray of garbage as turkeys. So I don't know if the Rabbanim agree with what you're saying. There could be a kosher turkey, but it could be a non-kosher turkey. It doesn't matter if turkeys existed or didn't exist in Europe, as long as they fit the requirements of what kosher says, and Rabbanim paskin so. So obviously it has to be shech properly and all that. If you don't have that, like even kosher animals can be rendered treif. So I understand you're ranting about it, but it's not necessarily correct, and I would go to rabbis that actually state clearly. Maybe some people are careful, they want to be muhudr, but turkey is known, even in the most stringent and most strict rabbis, that turkey is kosher. If obviously, again, the rules of turkey, the rules of kosher are applied. Okay. So the fact that you're going to a family that is serving turkey, I do not think is a problem with that. Ask a Rav, and he'll tell you it straight. If you're telling me that you know for sure that turkey is not kosher, or there's other kosher, if you told me you're going there and they're serving what you just said, some pork and bacon, I understand that question. But let me continue the question, and then I'll give my suggestion to you. And why do we need a Thanksgiving Day holiday? When we wake up and say Moda Ani in the morning, then every day is a Thanksgiving Day. Well, interestingly, the Rebbe actually acknowledged Thanksgiving as a good day. Now, it's not a Jewish holiday, but it's a day of thanking God. So even though every day we should thank God, but if there's a special day, what's the downside of that? My husband's parents say they will make chicken or other food for me, but I don't want to eat food cooked in the same kalim and ovens that turkey was cooked in. My husband thinks that this is okay to humiliate me and make me sit through this, and I don't want to be hungry while everyone else is eating, so I eat the sandwich I prepared myself sitting alone in the car outside. I won't eat my sandwich inside the house lest something non-kosher accidentally touches it, or if someone sitting near me ate the turkey, and while exhaling some of the air they exhale passes through traces of turkey in their mouth and picks up particles that go airborne and land on my kosher sandwich. Now, I don't know if this person is serious or not. Now I'm reading it further. I start thinking this sounds to me a little strange. Anyway, bottom line is, I'm not sure I want to go to this dinner and my children learn bad habits from them and start doing big averes by eating things that Torah forbids. What should I do? Well, since you're asking me, let me be very blunt. I think you should go, ask a Rav or ask two Rabbanim about turkey and find out that it's actually very kosher. If they're serving kosher chicken, they're serving kosher turkey, it's perfectly fine. Now, if you don't like turkey, whatever reason, personal tastes, you don't have to eat it. They'll make, like they said, they'll make something else, very kind of them. I'm not sure why you're making such a big fuss of all this. Why don't make a little fuss, go there, eat whatever you're comfortable eating, and that's that. This thing with the particles, that's not halachic, that's to me. So I don't know if this is coming from a healthy place or not healthy place. Since there's no name, I don't want to say anything that in any way is insulting. But in my opinion, go celebrate properly, make everyone happy, shalom bayis. I don't see anything wrong here. As I said, if you told me they were actually treif, I had my other suggestion would have been that maybe inspire them to make a kosher Thanksgiving meal. But that's not your question. Your question is particularly about this. So I would tell you again, Ask Rabbanim, I don't see any issue at all. I know this is very much not in the spirit of everything we've been speaking, but maybe a little lightheartedness can just help in times like this. But let's go back to what we began with. We are definitely living in historic times. Challenges we're facing. Again, let there be only nechama. Only joy and simchas. It's literally right after this tragedy, so it still very hurts us all. But at the end of the day, we have to think, what would the Rebbe tell us? We are higiyas mangu laschem. This should be the last tragedy of all. All the hostages should be released uninjured. All the soldiers should be protected. All the Yidden everywhere, especially in Eretz Yisrael and everywhere in the world, should be protected. And we should march taket to gizman gu laschem geula amitis va'ashlema. B'kod of mamish mamish. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, focused primarily about these latest sad events. And we're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a very good evening, a good week. The end of the Chodesh Cheshvan, we're going to then go into Chodesh Kislev, Chodesh HaGeula, and we should already have the Geula, as I said, B'kod of Mamish. Be well and kol tov.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.